All right. First off, thank you so much to Congressman Chip Roy from Texas, joining us on the line right now. First off, how are you doing? I know it's an interesting time heading into election season for everybody in Congress. How are things going for you?
Well, we're doing great. As we speak, I'm driving around the district I represent in Central Texas, which is just a little southwest of Austin, between Austin and San Antonio, out in what we call the Hill Country. And we've got, a lot of energy and enthusiasm out there to, make sure that we hold the line and stand up against the radical policies of this current administration and try to preserve and protect Texas with wide open borders and things that you can't even quite frankly put into words, but we're out working it hard.
All right. And that's what we love to hear. Now, the reason why we have you on the program, when we talked about this in the open a little bit, is you have put a plan out, and we're a show, Critical Thinking. We like to critically think through the news and views, but we also like to know that we have Congress people and we've got leaders inside Republican and Libertarian circles who are actually willing to not just give us platitudes, but give us plans, give us concrete things that we can look at and think through. And you did just that with the Stand Up for America plan and pledge, really, to your congressional district to stand up for America, fighting to restore common sense and responsible spending, freedom through government based upon the consent of the governed, not corporate crony interest, and a sovereign nation secure from both the tyranny of the authoritarian state and the vulnerability created by open borders and a woke, overextended military. So thank you for putting that plan out. First of all, what was the inspiration for this?
Well, I believe you need to be very honest with the people that you represent. I believe you need to put forward something that they can get behind and then hold you accountable to. I think you should do what you said you would do when you're in D.C. You said, use the phrase platitudes. I can't stand those. And you get a lot of that. Like, give me an example. You hear a lot of politicians say, I'm for, cutting spending. I'm for a balanced budget amendment. Well, look, I'm sure I'm for a balanced budget amendment. I'll vote for it. But is it going to pass anytime soon? No, that can't be your only tool that you're willing to pull out in order to stop the reckless spending that's destroying the future of our kids and grandkids. We can save this country with the tools in front of us. And so I wanted to lay out a plan for that. And look, when you've got a government led by an administration that is engaged in reckless, dangerous, inflationary spending, you ought to react to that by saying that you will freeze spending, go back to the pre-COVID disastrous levels, and lay out a 10-year balanced budget. So that's what I say. If you have an administration that's, frankly, at war with its own people, making them endangered as a result of policies of wide open borders, then I think you ought to put in writing that you will use the power of the purse to stop that and to demand that we secure the border. If your FBI is going after your citizenry, like the pro-life father in Pennsylvania or the father in Virginia who challenged the school board because his daughter was abused in a high school, I think you ought to challenge that and put that out there and say, yeah, I'm not going to just keep allowing tax dollars to be used to target Americans. So I laid out that plan to say, hey, there's some emergency items that we ought to use the power of the purse to stop. And then we ought to put forward an agenda the American people get behind, which is just common sense, right? We want to have safe streets, secure border, sovereign nation, only spend money that we have, stop driving up inflation with crazy policies, have energy, reliable grid, a strong military that doesn't have woke policies destroying it. These are the things the American people want, so I put it in writing.
I really like what you said there. This is Pat Oney, by the way. I'm the one that actually got in touch with you on Twitter and got in touch with your people over here to get you on the show today. But I was looking through this, and I appreciate everything that you're saying, and I fully back that up. My issue with this is, while we have a plan in place, we have the how in place, but when you have Democrats and you have establishment Republicans like Kevin McCarthy and Ditch McConnell in the Senate, who I wouldn't trust as far as I could throw them, how do we expect to get these kinds of things passed within Congress, let alone to the desk of the president to put into law?
So the answer there is actually what I laid out in the plan. Okay, the first thing, it was a 3-step plan. Step 1, free spending. Stop giving blank checks. The second part of that is then the specific fight, and that's to answer your question. You have to use the power of the purse. It doesn't matter. You're right. If you get to the step 3, I said pass bills that will inspire the American people and lay down a very specific plan of where we want to take the country. But the Senate's not going to pass it, and the president's not going to sign it. But what we can do, and that's step 2, that's the emergency items, right? Wide open borders, an abusive authoritarian state, public health apparatus, NIH, CDC, FDA, the FBI, the IRS, 85,000 agents, all of those things targeting the American people, an energy grid that's weakened, an energy policy driving up the cost of gas, all to pursue a woke agenda. Those things are things that we can stop by saying, look, Mr. President, we're not going to give you a blank check. We're going to fund government with these requirements. You will secure the border, and here's how. You will not go hire 85,000 new IRS personnel to go after the American people, right? We can do that. You know why? Because we're Congress. We're Article 1. The founders gave us that power. My good friend Mike Lee is one of the best at talking about constitutional issues. And I'm proud to serve with Mike Lee, by the way. I'm proud that Utah sends Mike Lee to Washington to stand up for the people. Mike believes in the Constitution like I do. We introduced the Article 1 Act together, under President Trump, by the way, to demand that we pull back power from the executive branch. Mike and I sent a letter just this last week questioning the abusive use of the FACE Act to target parents like the dad in Philadelphia because he dares goes to an abortion clinic. There are a lot of things like that where if we follow the Constitution and we demand that we adhere to it and check the executive branch, including the power of the purse. Federalist 58, James Madison, he said it's the most effective tool you can give to the people, the power of the purse in the House of Representatives. So we should use it.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with that, especially because you take a look at the potential for the Republican Party to really kind of not just narrowly win in the 2022 midterm election here, but potentially have a 35, 38 seat advantage. There's a lot that can be done in terms of controlling the purse. And one of them that you had mentioned here is the ending of COVID tyranny, ending the vaccine mandates, eliminating the emergency powers abuses. And we've seen that from the CDC. We've seen it from the White House and Joe Biden and some of the executive orders. The abuse of our military, the story of the individual in Florida, the Coast Guard person who bravely rescued people in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian, going to be dishonorably discharged, right? Going to be taken away because he doesn't want to get the vaccine. In that vein, though, as we look at the information that just came out in Europe and in Pfizer, where they talked about not even testing for immunity, can you talk to us about something that Congress may be able to do to hold those people and the government accountable? Because as far as I remember, Congress and the White House and Senate gave an immunity to these companies from prosecution on civil or criminal charges. And for me, I look at what they just admitted as a material breach of that immunity deal. Is that something that you guys would be looking at heading into 2023?
So without question, one of the most important things we need to do, besides what I just articulated about using the power of the purse to check an executive branch that is out of control in all the ways I just outlined, the border, the energy, the public health apparatus, the FBI, IRS agents, we also must have very specific oversight. I believe we should have something akin to the church committee type style oversight, which was done in the 70s against a lot of the abuse of power. I believe we need that here across multiple agencies focused on the public health apparatus. You just articulated the FBI and other DHS, frankly, and abuse of power. Specific to the public health question, which you rightly highlighted, and it was you're very informed about it. this recent revelation about what we saw with the European Union Parliament, where it was very clear what's actually happening here in terms of the pharmaceutical companies and what we now know about the vaccines and the extent to which they were not actually fully tested, the extent to which they have been then administered to people under, frankly, mandates, under the false idea that it was any meaningful way or even at all limiting transmission.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what happened. Let's be very honest. It was very specific. And as a result, our children were put in the corners. They were made to wear masks. Our schools were shut down. Our economies were shut down. Lives were ruined. Businesses were destroyed. We ended up having many members of our military, Coast Guard, like you point out, Border Patrol, other authorities who have lost their jobs because they didn't think it was in their best interest. And I think often now the evidence is saying wisely so, to take an experimental vaccine under mandate, while Pfizer and Moderna pocket $93 billion, that's with a B, $93 billion under the threat and the power of government. You absolutely are correct that we should have hearings, we should expose it, and then we should take steps to make sure it doesn't happen again. And there's another piece to this. I'm sorry to filibuster. I'll stop talking. This is a problem of big healthcare. This goes beyond just the public health debacle, but it's a symptom of a bigger problem of government mandated, insurance run healthcare. You have to go to an insurance company to choose your doctor. You have to go to an insurance company to get permission. You have to follow some government mandates and edicts. And you know what you get for the pleasure? $22,500 in your insurance premiums to have a $7,500 deductible, so you can have a handful of doctors they approve, and you're dealing with 24% increase in insurance premiums in the last year. That's unacceptable, and we need to change that.
Yeah, 100%. And Pat, I know you've got some questions too here, so I'll throw it over to you.
Sure. So with the election coming up, and obviously I honestly believe Republicans are going to take the House in 2023 and likely the Senate as well. First of all, what is your timeline to put your plan into place, and what's next for you?
So I think I heard that question. It was a little fuzzy, but I think the question was, what is the timeline, depending on what happens with the election, about putting a plan in place to take action?
Correct. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the first step, obviously, not to get ahead of ourselves, is make sure we've got the right people in place between now and November 8th, right? And I know you know that, and we were sort of accepting that premise. But it does matter, right? I do think we'll win the House. The question is how many seats. I think the Senate is a 50-50 call. Every Senate seat is going to matter. Mm-hmm. Adam Laxalt's down in Nevada. Mike Lee's there in Utah. We've got races that we need to show up and make sure we have the right solid conservatives in Washington. It's important that we do that. But then to your question, we will immediately on November 9th, I know I'm heading to D.C. on the 9th or the 10th to go work with my colleagues to start taking what we've already been doing, the work, the plans, the thoughts. We've got what I produced as my commitment to my constituents. It's very public. We have the Freedom Caucus has a lot of stuff we put out in terms of rules changes that need to occur to make the House respond to the rank and file. Mm-hmm. We have the Commitment to America by the Republican leadership, which, while very high level, very 50,000 feet, has a lot of good overall direction in the commitment. And we're now working to add meat to that bone. I'm literally a call I've just had and I'm going to have in a couple of hours is all about putting meat on the border security bone, right? We've got to take very specific steps in choosing how we're going to conduct oversight. It's complicated. We're playing whack-a-mole with crazy every single day. So what do we highlight for the American people? Is it Fauci and the public health corruption? Is it the FBI and their overreach? Is it a DHS where Secretary Mayorkas literally lied to the American people about the whipping of Haitians by Border Patrol agents? Is it highlighting the energy debacle and what's happening in terms of weakening our grid and making us beholden to enemies? There are so many things we could spend countless hours on exposing. We've got to figure out how best to do that with a media that doesn't want to help us. So we're going to work on that. We're going to work on rules changes. and we're going to work on some of these fights. But let me just distill it down to the one most important thing. Stop funding tyranny. That's it. We cannot continue to write blank checks to give bureaucrats the authority to go after us and undermine our well-being.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great way to approach that, because we have talked on this show, Congressman Roy, about the purse strings, the power that actually exists in the Constitution. If the Congress would take it back, would suck some of that power back from the executive branch, you could fix a lot of the issues quickly if you could just do that. There seems to be no appetite, at least from the Democratic side. What are you seeing from your colleagues in the appetite to do that work?
So, as usual, you used the term establishment earlier. There are some very notable establishment members of the House and certainly the Senate. I think there's some very obvious establishment members in the Senate. Our job over the next couple of months is to, as we work through this and Lord willing, take the House, and I hope we pull off the Senate, our job as conservatives is to very rationally, but very resolutely, with clear resolve, lay out the path for doing what needs to be done with respect to the spending restraint to check tyranny. We do not want to accept the premise that Republicans often accept, that we will be, quote, blamed for shutdown, that we'll be the obstructionists. Rather, we need to put the onus on Democrats. We need to put forward a plan that funds government the way we believe it should be funded, and then go sell that. Let Biden say no to a common sense funding bill. Let the Senate reject a common sense Republican-led effort in the House. Let's message it directly to the American people. We're going to fund the government to secure the border. We're going to fund government to restore the FBI to rooting out crime instead of targeting citizens. We're going to restore an energy policy that means that our grids will be functional and we're no longer empowering China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Venezuela. Let's put that out there. Let them reject that. That's the important part to this. We know what we need to do. Stop spending money we don't have. Put us on a, common sense spending plan like you guys do, like your families do, like every business, family in Utah and everywhere else around the country do. And therefore limit inflation by limiting that spending. Be responsible, but do the constitutional duties of government. Secure the people, secure our communities. Make sure that we've got energy. We don't stand in the way of the production of energy and allowing our great American system to produce the best energy, the best health care, and the best goods and services for the American people possible.
And I guess one last question before we let you go here for me is more about trust. I think knowing what we know about what you've put out, how you present yourself, and most importantly, how authentic you have been throughout your time in Congress, I think it's easy to be able to say, you're a man of, I'm going to say what I say and do what I do, right? I'm going to mean what I say and say what I mean. And my question to you is, when we go forward, if Republicans do end up taking the House and the Senate, how do we hold those people in positions of power accountable to stand up and put this type of a plan or something in a framework? How do we hold them accountable for putting action in place? How do we do it? Because we hear it time and again, every election, right? You got to vote GOP to stop this. If we just give the GOP the House, if you just give them the Senate, if you just give them the presidency, and then nothing happens. How do we know? How do we change that dynamic?
By not being afraid to very specifically call out elected officials when they violate that which they campaigned on, when they violate that promise to do what they said they would do. That's that simple. Let me give you an example. I don't always agree with all of my colleagues in the Texas delegation. You can work personally with them to try to accomplish some objective. You can work together. But when I disagree, I respectfully call them out. When they vote in a way that I think undermines the very thing that they campaigned upon, I'm going to call them out. Even, for example, if it was one of my older old bosses. I worked for both Senator Cruz and Senator Cornyn. I've got some disagreements, and I'm not afraid to call it out. I'm not afraid to call out any of my colleagues, some of my Freedom Caucus colleagues. I wasn't afraid to call out President Trump. You can agree with somebody 80 or 90% of the time. You can still want to go vote for them, support them, but you need to call them out when you think they're getting it wrong and not be afraid to do so. I disagreed with some of the decision making that went in and leading up to January 6th. I was very public about that. We don't have to get into it right now, but that's out there. It's very much in the public domain. I disagreed with some of the spending levels under President Trump. I filed the Article 1 Act, like I said a minute ago, with Mike Lee to check the executive branch use of executive power, emergency power. And so I think that's important. Call it out when you disagree. And so for y'all in Utah, I think, well, if you disagree with something Mike does, call it out. But we need to get Mike elected because he's one of the best. I can't overstate that. When you disagree with Mitt Romney, call it out. Nobody's royalty. Nobody's royalty. And, I gave a speech at the University of Virginia about a year ago, almost exactly, in a couple of weeks. It'll be a year ago. It was a defense of Thomas Jefferson. Now, I went to the University of Virginia. He founded the University of Virginia. Jefferson did. So I was there with Rich Lowry. And the central theme of my speech was that I wasn't going to be there to defend the man. I didn't know the man. He died 200 years ago. But I was going to defend the ideals. And if he didn't live up to the ideals, and of course he didn't. Why? Because we're all sinners who have fallen short of the glory of God. That's the truth. We're taught that in Romans. We're taught that in our, scripture. And the fact is, you're going to fall short, but it doesn't mean you don't set the ideal. That's the point. And so when our leaders, I guess one, I don't know, but senators, all this, when we put people out there, we need to be held accountable. And we're not on a pedestal. We're not royalty. We're not deity, right? There is one God, and we operate with that recognition and knowing that in a free country, in a republic, representing the people, we're supposed to do that. I know it's a long-winded answer, but it's important to me. It's one of the most important questions you can ask. We cannot be afraid to call out our folks, even when they're our friends, when they get those things wrong.
Yeah, and there's no doubt fear has run rampant in this society over the last 3, 5, even decade, if you will. So thank you so much for your time. I know you're a very, very busy man right now between all your duties to your district and all the election stuff going on. Thank you so much for your time today. How can people check out, number one, your Stand Up for America plan and follow what you're doing and being an authentic member of Congress?
So that plan is available on roy.house.gov. That's my official website. It's there. It's in a press release from about a month ago. And you can click on the link and see it. You can probably Google it. You can go to my Twitter account, Chip Roy, CHIPROYTX, to follow me on Twitter. Or Rep Chip Roy is my official account that my staff is out there putting out news about what we put out and bills and so forth. And chiproy.com is my official side. My political side website, here during the campaign. So, but look, just glad to be on your show. Appreciate it. Appreciate y'all being a voice for conservatism in Utah. I will be in Utah this weekend. Looking forward to it. I'm going to be out there helping Mike Lee. I'll see him on Saturday with a bunch of my other conservative colleagues. We'll be out rallying the troops there, and I hope to be there, I think, for a few days doing stuff throughout the state. So, and I know it's a beautiful state, and it's a good time of year to be there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Take care. God bless.